Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's good to be with you here on Thursday afternoon, August something. Was it August the 6th already? I've got Brad Smith with me today on Power Lunch. The point of the show is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world, who can help us get better at what we do. Now, Brad is the founder and CEO of Codeless. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And I think he can help us get better, a lot better at our content. I know we're all just killing ourselves with trying to create good content. Brad's going to help us out a little bit, I think, today with that. Now, again, the show is live on LinkedIn. It is also live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and probably something else I'm forgetting. Now, the point of that is so that you can ask your questions. The show is interactive. So get on your keyboard, ask your questions while you have Brad's attention, and ask your questions so that you can get answers to what you need and get help with what you need. Now, the side benefit of that is your network can benefit from the conversations, and our network can grow. So anyway, please do that. Please like or share the program if you don't mind. Now, Brad is the founder and CEO, like I said, of Codeless. It's a content production company whose content has been highlighted by the New York Times, Business Insider, The Next Web, and thousands more. He's the co-founder of uSERP. It's uSERP, right?
Yeah.
A digital PR company that helps connect its clients with the leading SaaS and eCommerce and SEO tech companies to help boost brand authority. Brad, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rhett. Looking forward to this.
You having a good summer?
I am, yeah. We're kind of a long story, but we're traveling. My family's traveling right now. I'm in Scottsdale currently, sitting outside, so it's a little warm, as you can imagine. Trying to get some outside time before the afternoon when it's 110.
I hear you. Yeah, it's good to be on the road. It's good to. So, are you guys doing the whole like RV thing, or are you just doing the car thing?
We're not doing the RV. We have 3 young kids, and I think an RV would create some issues, with the space and everything else. So we're actually kind of, again, it's a long story. We're trying to go to Hawaii September, depending on the quarantine restrictions. And then from there, hopefully going to Australia, New Zealand, and kind of working our way around the world, hopefully. So it's kind of a slow, everything's changing like week to week, month to month with the restrictions and everything. So we're just kind of playing the next few weeks or months by year.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, man. I think that's something you have to do. I think that's a great thing to do with your kids. And now that people are used to working remote, there's no reason why you shouldn't do it, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's like every day. I feel like Groundhog's Day, that old movie with Bill Murray, right? Where it's just like every day is the same and every day bleeds into the next. So yeah, it should be fun. Hopefully soon. Just kind of stressful now, but
that's all right. It'll get better, I'm sure. So, talk about Codeless and what problem are you solving? I mean, everybody knows that content is really, really important. Everybody gets that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of challenges with that, and it's for me, it's like I don't have any problem creating content. It's what I do with it afterwards and where you put it right. That's my challenge. But so what is Codeless and what are you guys working on? What problems are you working to solve for people?
Definitely. Yeah. So Codeless is a content production company. We're kind of like a content marketing agency, essentially. But we do a lot of things differently, I guess. One of those is we do a lot of high volume publishing for large companies in really competitive spaces. And so we solve a couple problems there. One is that the content today typically needs to be a lot better and a lot more in depth than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when everyone was just saying to create more content. So that means a few things. It means a lot more strategy kind of and research at the beginning to make sure the content we're producing and publishing is actually going to perform. It means recruiting and hiring and training better writers. So a lot of times those are like actual subject matter experts on whatever they're talking about. And then writing in a very specific way based on like search intent. So when people search for this or when people are asking questions about this topic, what does that mean and what are they looking for specifically? And then from there, we also work with designers. And so there's like a lot of moving pieces typically in this, like, we try to create this kind of like well-oiled machine, whether we're doing that across like a bunch of different clients or in some cases, if we're doing a lot of high volume stuff with one client. So kind of a few different pieces that we're trying to address or solve.
Okay. What could you talk about content development and as in sort of like your produce kind of a production, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that? What and how does that make the difference in how content is I mean, is it the difference in the way it's distributed, where it's distributed, or does it mean in the way that people kind of receive it?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So if you go back, like I kind of alluded to, if you go back 15 years ago, and everyone was saying, oh yeah, you just need to create more content. And so what you had was a lot of these like almost like eHow type sites or about.com where it was like 500 generic words on some random topic, and that was kind of good enough. Unfortunately, today that's not the case because the competition's savvier. There's more people creating content, and so it's the days of just like working with a one-off kind of freelance writer to churn out a few pieces, but they don't really know what they're talking about. They're just kind of like sourcing generic secondary information, and those days are rapidly declining. And so what we find ourselves doing a lot now is creating this like production flow where we have strategy people working with the writers and the clients and account managers coordinating everything and pulling designers in or people doing video. So if we're creating one piece of content, we might have video in there, we might have design in there. And so in that way, when it does go to publish, you can republish or repurpose a lot of that content on social, on advertising campaigns, on all that stuff. So there's a lot more like coordination. And it's a lot more of like a team approach to be able to like actually get the full mileage out of what you are producing or publishing.
So, okay, so it's not really just even writing anymore, is it? It's you got to have video, you got to have design.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll do, when I say we have design, for instance, we'll do custom design illustrations for each piece that we're creating. And so we publish something like 250 articles a month. And so as you can imagine, that's a lot of work. So it's a lot of design, a lot of video. Exactly. So usually the text, the article is like the script. It's like the starting point, like the raw materials. And then from there, it's a lot of other stuff that we're adding into it to make sure, again, that if we're creating an article and we know it's going to be used for ad campaigns, well, images and video are going to help bring down the ad cost. And so, it's going to cost a little more upfront to get those kind of assets created. But once that goes into the ad campaign for the client, it's going to substantially bring down like the cost per click, cost per lead when they're promoting that stuff. So it's kind of like, what's the old corny cliche, begin with the end in mind. It's kind of like taking that approach and really trying to live up to it as much as possible.
What is working now? Like when you talk about that in the sense, I mean, and so if I'm looking to put out an ad campaign, to me, it's there's so many avenues now, right? Mm-hmm. And I know you got to know your market and you got to know where they consume their media and all that, but how do you manage that? How do you make that content effective? Because you can have the best design in the world, the best video in the world, the best article in the world, right? But if it's not getting in the right place, so how do you get that to get to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good point. I think there's certain content types will do better under different circumstances. So for example, a really long, in-depth how-to article is going to perform better for search typically. A list post that's maybe a little contrarian, or maybe we source like expert quotes or something in it, something like that might perform better on social with referral traffic, and then therefore might also be better suited to like social advertising. So I think that's the beginning, is just kind of like defining the content types that you're doing, and then understanding like where to push them and why. And so again, going back to if we're doing more of a search-driven piece because we want it to be evergreen, that's going to like kind of color the information we use. We don't want topical news. We don't want stuff that's going to get outdated really quickly. Right. And there's going to be a very heavy search intent behind that. So in other words, we're using semantic keywords. We're doing internal linking. We're kind of paying attention to all those types of details. If we're doing a list post, or if we're touching on something that's a little more topical and a little more newsworthy, and it's going to go to social advertising, we don't want it to make it as dry, maybe, and as boring and as evergreen, because it's going to, if you flip those, it's going to be counterproductive and it's actually going to take away. So we want it to be a little more interesting. We want to use video. If the video is going to be shorter and have more like cuts and changes, and all that kind of stuff to keep people's attention, because it needs to be kind of like a 15-second clip on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever. So it really does, when you're starting from the beginning, it really does help you figure out, just by understanding where you're putting it, what your ultimate goal is. It does help you figure out how do you actually structure the content to be a lot more effective in whatever avenue it's going down.
Okay.
So I think that was a long-winded answer, but I think the point is, like, it's what works now. It's really making sure that you're if you're doing a video, it needs to be prepared from the very beginning. The actual like script or just the actual, flow of it. It needs to be set up for, Facebook 15-second clip versus 30-second clip. Or if it's going to be 2 minutes and going to go on YouTube, then that's a totally different type of video that we're going to have to like think through of what information we're trying to get across and all that kind of stuff.
So that's a really important point, because I mean, you're looking at down to the platform. So I mean, a 15-second video might work on Facebook, but that's not good for LinkedIn, right?
Right.
And not good for YouTube, right? So that's interesting that you're getting really down to that specific of a platform for what you're putting together.
Yeah, definitely. And then production values change too. So if we're doing a video for a web page that's evergreen, and maybe there's commercial intent behind it, so it's like a pricing page, and that the production values will be a lot better and a lot more polished for that, versus if we're doing a video for social, it tends to be more informal, purposely, because we want it to be personable and everything else. So we'll have different people do it. Production values will be different. It'll be a lot more kind of like minimal. So there might be like some basic cuts and changes. There may or may not be music behind it. So it changes kind of like the tone of it and all that type of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, is that, I mean, and that sort of explains why you're talking about half of the content and get 2 times the results. I mean, is that what that means? Is focusing more on the specific platforms and producing content just for those platforms, and not just a shotgun approach to in creating a ton of content?
Yeah, definitely. So in most cases, we're still, I don't know, fairly old school in a sense of where we're still trying to create articles for search at the end of the day, just because it brings in so many visitors. And if we're investing so much into it, we still want it to be relevant for the long term. So a lot of the emphasis and the investment still goes into like creating a one piece of content. But then on top of that, you might have the audio, you might have the Q&A, you might have the video. Maybe it's a video interview with a couple experts, and you're dropping that stuff into the article itself. But then you're still able to go and repurpose it to each individual channel in the right way. Okay. So then you could still go take the audio clip and put it here. You could still take the short video clip and put it here. Or even just take, if there's a 60-minute or something like this, a longer video, we could still pull clips that are 15, 30 seconds and highlights, put the captions in, put a little music behind it, and then still repurpose the pieces, for each different channel. But by doing it that way, we're not spinning our wheels trying to like just create content for each individual platform, because as you alluded to, that's a lot of work and a lot of time and money.
But it feeds into, it feeds off of maybe the article, right? Or it feeds off that one primary piece, right? And then it's all kind of comes back to that, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's very easy then to take something longer and better produced and cut it down and make it shorter and easier to repurpose. It's a lot easier to do it that way than it is to do the reverse, which is just to create a ton of 30-second clips off of information you don't really have yet. So it makes it really difficult to kind of go backwards.
Yeah, that seems that makes sense. So what you talk about, and I've seen some of your stuff about the pros and cons of hiring content writing agencies and freelancers and all this. Can you talk about that? Because I think it's, for CEOs and people who know a little bit enough to make huge mistakes. I know I need a lot of I need content, so I have to go out there and I have to find somebody to do it for me. What questions should I be asking when I hire someone to help me with this? What in that term, that goes in terms of hiring an agency to help me put it out there too, right? Because I think we often get in often are not happy with the result of how that goes when we do hire somebody. And I know I've made that mistake before in hiring people for to get content out for us. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So I've worked in-house a marketing team. I've worked as a freelancer in writing, and then now run a content agency. So I've kind of seen like the different perspectives of it, and especially with writing. I don't think companies don't always understand like where to best use each. There are valid reasons for using each one of those. In-house, hiring in-house full-time people, freelancers and agents. There's good and bad for all that stuff. I think you need to like kind of like you're saying, you really want to think through like before jumping into it. Are you using the right one for the right reason type of thing? So for instance, in-house writers are typically a lot more knowledgeable about the problems and the way and the style of the company. And so the way they want to talk about things, the way they phrase things. Generally speaking, in-house writers are really good at doing maybe more like middle or bottom of the funnel content. And what I mean by that is stuff that tends to be a little more around the product or the service or whatever it is you guys are trying to sell. The problem with in-house writers typically is scale. And so they're going to tap out because often they're pulled into meetings, they're pulled into email, they're pulled into editing an executive's PowerPoint before they go do a speech somewhere. And so they're maybe able to do, 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 articles a week max. And what happens is that becomes challenging if they're trying to do case studies and all different content types too. So it just becomes really challenging for that person. And then you have to hire a lot of them and it becomes really expensive pretty quickly. Freelancers help with that because finding a couple good freelancers gives you that balance of like, okay, you can use an in-house person to do this style of stuff that they excel at, but then you can use the freelancers to boost that scale a little bit. So if you have a couple freelancers doing a couple pieces a week and you can work closely with them over time, usually they'll start to learn the space more, or they might already be a subject matter expert in their own right. The problem there is you generally need someone to manage all those freelancers. And so that becomes another challenge where it's like, if you're trying to do really high volume, like we have a couple clients where we might do 100 articles a month. And if you're managing freelance writers for that, you have to use like, at least 10 writers a month to do that many. And that's even that you still, people's schedules are different. People get sick, people go on vacation, people have emergencies that pop up. All these things threaten to like knock you off deadlines and other stuff. And so that becomes another massive challenge. And with freelancers, they each generally have like their own billing rates. They have different billing structures. And so it's companies don't always like factor in how much time they're spending coordinating, project managing. And then that's where agencies are usually really good at. So that you're paying the agency to handle all those problems. And that works well then if you don't have, maybe you have one internal like content manager or director of content or someone who's moonlighting to help edit and help like field stuff, but you're essentially paying the agency to help figure out strategy, help if you need a designer, the agency goes and gets the designer. So you're not having to like factor all that stuff in internally in-house. So those are like some of the common things. But again, with agencies, they tend to be more on the more expensive end. If they are experts in your space, then it's usually worth it. It's usually worth the extra cost because you're not having to hire people internally. The problem is if they're like a generalist agency and if they don't have expertise in your space, often you're overpaying for the quality you're getting versus in-house or freelance. And so that's where like kind of all these pros and cons come into play, and it does get a little tricky for sure.
And asking those questions, right? I mean, I think that those are, that's an important thing. What is the right volume in terms of your content? I mean, I know that's probably not a fair question because it's probably different for every sort of industry, but 100 articles a month, that seems crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot. We work with some big tech companies. They live in like a different world than most companies because once you take a lot of VC money, you have like a ticking time bomb almost, where you have to hit a certain point in a very short amount of time. And it's also kind of their market dynamics are a little different because it's kind of winner take all. So they have to run to the top of the pile before someone else does. Otherwise, all that money they just took has not been invested properly. And so they operate under very different, typically when a lot of money goes into a space like that, it becomes extremely competitive. So look at cybersecurity, look at finance, look at even like marketing applications, sales apps. help desk, project management, it becomes like very, very competitive. And the volume requirements typically for them tends to be higher. But what you're doing is with content, it should be an investment. There should be a payback period. You should get a lot more traffic and money and leads and sales from that content 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months down the line because of SEO, because of search. The old stuff that's been around longer and it's sitting on a bigger site tends to perform better over time. And so you're not necessarily investing a lot more 12 months later, but because it's been able to start ranking and improving over that time, you're able to bring in significantly more traffic and everything else down the road.
So it's not an immediate conversion. Yeah. It's not immediate conversion. You're looking at just pilot it in, pilot it on, and the long-term SEO of that. I guess, okay, the long-term, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're spending, and what you're doing is you're shifting resources from advertising. So advertising, especially like look at Google Ads, pay-per-click, it's always going to be more expensive because it's an auction. And so over time, as the more competitors come in, if you talk about like law, insurance, 10 years ago when we did ads for law, it was like $100 per click for personal injury stuff in big markets. And that's only going to get more expensive over time because you're going to have more people going, into channels like that actually do convert as money flows away from radio, TV, billboards, and all that kind of stuff. And so that's always going to get more expensive, but it gives you short-term immediate results. And so content should hopefully offset that, where you're putting more money up front into something that should perform better in the long term to help bring down the amount of money you're going to have to spend 10 years from now on banner ads and billboards and all that kind of stuff. So it is, again, it's kind of like the conversation a minute ago where there's pros and cons to both. Your original question though, like volume requirements for most companies is a lot less. It generally depends on the market, the competition, what people are searching for too. So even if you're like a plumbing company, you still have tons of people searching for everything related to not just like which toilets to buy or any of that type of stuff, but also if you extrapolate that out, it's like, how do I fix a leaky faucet? How do I do this? All those more top of the funnel information type stuff. Content for those is going to help people kind of discover the need. So if I think I'm going to fix my own refrigerator, but then I see a video or I start doing a little bit of research and I understand that it's going to take me 6 hours, then I'm saying, no way, I'm going to hire someone else because I don't have the time to do that or the expertise to do that. And so that's, even for those types of companies, those are usually what you should be trying to hit, and because that's what's going to bring in the longer term kind of lead flow, I guess.
Okay. And that kind of was a great sort of segue into the question. I mean, with the written content, is it sales oriented or is it information oriented? Am I making an ask in that content, or am I just writing a piece of content that says, this is how you fix your refrigerator, or, this is
a little bit of both. In an ideal world, so in copywriting, an old framework to use is problem, agitate, solution. So at the beginning of the content, you address the problem of what someone's searching for. So how do I, are you losing sleep at night because your faucet keeps dripping or your toilet keeps running, right. And you're trying to do a professional work call and you got this thing leaking in the background. So it's problem and agitate. So that's the kind of my example is a little hyperbolic, but like you can't sleep at night because of these issues, and your wife keeps like nudging you, like, hey, when are you gonna fix it? When are you gonna fix it? When are you gonna fix it? Right. So you're agitating the problem, and then you're solving the problem by actually like walking people through step 1, step 2, step 3, whatever the case is. What you want to do is even if you're creating something that's informational, you still want to position the content and your service as the solution. So even if, hey, like, so at the very end of that, you don't need an overt kind of sales pitch, but hey, if it's a lot easier and faster, we can quote this for you in less than 20 minutes. Yeah, exactly. So you're just subtly positioning yourself as the solution for all those problems that you're highlighting and addressing and teaching people or showing people how to fix. Okay.
Yeah, I like that. That's good information. So talk about how, you've got the content, you've got that part of it. How do you get links and mentions from top sites? Like, how do you, are there some tricks, tips, something that helps us get the eyeballs on that piece of content that you're publishing?
For sure. Yeah. So there's a couple different ways to do it. If possible, you want to try to almost make sure that you're creating content around something that those people are actually going to want to mention or cover. So this becomes a problem, for instance, with B2B websites. Tend to be all the content on B2B websites tends to be about that company and what they do. And people, like journalists, don't want to cover that. Bloggers aren't interested. No one wants to link to anything like that naturally. And so what happens is it forces that company to like go buy links or go do all these things just because they're trying to push a rock going uphill. It becomes really difficult. They're fighting against like inertia.
Well, I get that stuff from my columns all the time. I mean, where does it go? It goes right in the delete file, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So I think one example that I loved recently, back in like March, when the quarantine started and everyone started kind of hunkering down and companies started doing layoffs, one company, Candor, created like a hiring, like who's hiring, who's firing, a huge list, and they were sourcing from actual people what companies that they worked at were hiring, firing, and they created this huge database, and it ended up being like thousands of companies that ended up getting entered in there. So they also did kind of like a layoff list. So people that were getting laid off, they created a database to help them like find new places. So that something like that naturally started fitting in really well with journalists trying to cover the business ramifications, the financial ramifications of all these quarantines and everything else happening. So they got links from like VentureBeat and a bunch of other like really big tech press places, just naturally, because journalists were kind of already looking for that information. So that's something where you're already kind of like riding a wave. They call it newsjacking back in the day. You're already kind of riding a wave of interest. And so that makes it a lot easier then to go out and say, hey, you just wrote this article about X that's related to this. We have something that I think would be like super interesting to you. And most people probably get those types of emails already. The problem is that none of them are good. Like the actual resource they're pitching you isn't any good. And what they're referencing probably may or may not be good. And the first name they call you in the email is probably wrong. Like it's just executed really poorly. And so there's no like, secrets here. It's just creating something that people actually want and then executing it really well and making sure you're following up and or building those relationships, before you need it. So if you're trying to help a journalist with a quote, like does that journalist actually know who you are, like before you're trying to pitch them something? If not, then maybe you should work on that first. Kind of get an intro, get on their good side, and then you can ask them, hey, like what areas are you looking into? What are you currently researching? Are there any stories you're working on that you're trying to get more information from, or I can help connect you with an expert if you need it, just to be helpful. So kind of building those inroads from the very beginning makes a huge difference when it comes time to actually like go for the ask and get the benefit of it.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would say too about that is making sure that you're reaching out to people who cover that type of business or that kind of industry. I mean, I get things all the time, right? And they haven't done their homework. And so they've just wasted their time sending that to me, and they're wasting my time making me open it to see what it's about. And I think, making sure that you're very specific with the type of people you're reaching out, that they're going to cover what your business is, because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere with them. So
yeah, totally. And it's you don't always have to write about like your boring space. That's the other thing that people get hung up on, is they're like, if they're plumbers, then they just think like, oh, a journal, like you're right in saying that journalists are not going to want to cover any plumbers. But if you need to make it interesting, and you need to connect it back to whatever they're writing about already or whatever their space is. And so if you're sticking in this kind of business example, like if it's a plumbing company, what are the quarantine ramifications for plumbing companies or people who have plumbing issues they need fixed? It could be it could be like wait times. It could be I don't know. Now I'm struggling with good examples, but you could connect it back to a topic that these people actually do talk about and are interested in, and that's how you get the kind of wheel moving.
Right, and a small business reporter might be interested in that, right? Or somebody that covers entrepreneurship, or somebody that covers, how COVID is affecting small business. I mean, there are people who cover broader topics where this might fit in. But researching that is really important.
Yeah, exactly. And if maybe too, if it's like during the initial quarantine, if plumbers aren't allowed to go in houses, I don't know if that happened, but if they're not allowed to go in, here's a diagram of the most common, or here's a couple of videos of the most common issues and how to fix them on your own with daily household items, so you don't have to go to the store and buy a new. So like different angles like that connect it back to that broader topic is how you get stuff featured typically.
How to temporarily fix these problems, right? And until you feel safe, people coming in your home or something. Yeah, and
exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. I like that. So this has been great. I know you're on the road and traveling and such, but thanks for being with us today. This is really fascinating. I'll have to have you back on when on a panel or something when we have a broader discussion about content and thought leadership. Because I think some of the things that you're talking about are really, really important and really hard. I mean, it's hard to get your head around as a leader and as a head of an organization. You know how important it is, but the details of how to best and more effectively get your content and your work out there is it's an important topic, and it's a challenging one, and I think it's ever evolving. So appreciate your insight today.
Yeah, definitely happy to help, and would love to feature again sometime soon.
How do people find Codeless and get in touch if they want to talk to you about your work and how you can help them?
Yeah, definitely. Getcodeless.com is the domain. uSERP is USERP, like search engine result page. It's a play on the wording, possibly a little too clever when you're trying to tell someone what the domain is. But it's uSERP, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. I believe my username on there is like BF Marketer for my initials, and also most marketers full of a little BF anyway.
Well, that's what they say.
Yeah.
All right, Brad. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today here on Power Lunch Live. You can look at our schedule at powerlunch.live for the upcoming schedule next week. We're looking forward to that. Until then, have a great weekend. Stay safe and make it a productive rest of your week. And we'll see you next Tuesday at noon on Power Lunch Live.